it's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story Podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hello, and this is Ivy Slater with an episode of Her Success Story. Thank you to the subscribers who get this Her Success Story dropped in every week, and welcome to the new listeners. Today I have an amazing guest and actually an old friend who's joining me. Julie Fleming and I were just catching up, reminiscing our lives, as most of our lives in all of us in our relationships can go in different directions and have some detours. And we had this catch-up call, and I said, we need to get this out here. There's such great stories. So Julie is the owner of Fleming Strategic. She guides lawyers to develop strategic business plans, identify and undertake action items, and implement that plan. So Julie and I have always had an enormous amount of common ground because I work with a lot of attorneys myself. She is the author of The Reluctant Rainmaker, a guide for authors who hate selling, 7 Foundations of Time Mastery for Attorneys, and Legal Rainmaking Myths. So this all sounds great for the attorneys out there. As many of our journeys do, they take some detours. Julie is also the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called the Purple Sherpa, which educates, supports, and encourages dementia families, care partners, and caregivers. Having served her father's sole primary caregiver for nearly 7 years, following his diagnosis with dementia, she remains committed to assisting those caring for a family member who's living with dementia. So here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen and listeners. Julie's a woman who is brilliant, makes strategic decisions, and is grounded in the foundation of what's important to her and why it's important. And that's why I asked Julie to join me here today on Her Success Story. So welcome, Julie.
Oh, thank you so much, Ivy. I'm delighted to be with you, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
So your dad was diagnosed around what time? And where were you in your life when this was going on? Share a little bit of your backstory. I'll always say the big bio is in the story, and you could read the notes later.
Yes, and the details are always in the conversation, right?
Exactly.
So in 2010, I was in the process of getting divorced, and I left Orlando, where I was living with my husband, and was traveling a huge amount with my business at the time. So I didn't really have time to figure out where I wanted to put my things. I had kind of thought about moving to Wyoming and so on and so forth, but I decided to drop my stuff off with my dad while I went on and did my travels, and then figured I would pick it up and choose my place and go on with my life. And as I sat with my dad, I started to notice more and more things that just didn't seem quite right. And looking back, I see that there were signs as early as 2008. But in 2010, it started to become clear, Houston, we have a problem here. And he was finally diagnosed in the fall of 2011.
And at that time, so you were in a strategic life transition. And, listeners, this isn't a sad story. This is the story of what we can do, the decisions as we make as leaders. So you made some decisions. You're an attorney. So let's go back and cover. One of the reasons you work with attorney is you've been an attorney for a long time.
Yes, I practice law actually in firms ranging from about 3 to over 2,100 lawyers, doing mostly patent litigation for about 15 years. And I realized that practice is wonderful. I enjoyed it. Unlike most people who leave, I really liked practicing law. But especially with a practice like patent litigation, it's limiting geographically. So for instance, when I moved to Orlando, there was a choice of one firm where I could work. And it's very difficult to build a sophisticated practice and move around. And I could tell my life was going to have me moving around because I enjoy that. So I started to think about what I could do and realized that I was always the person where I'd be sitting in my office and one of my colleagues would come in and say, hey, do you have a minute? And they'd close the door and we'd start to talk about their lives and what they wanted from their practice and what was working and what wasn't working. And I realized that this is actually a job, that I could make a business out of this. And it shifted to purely business development in about 2009, the Great Recession, when there was one day where I had a full roster of clients scheduled, and every single one either had been laid off, was in legitimate fear of being laid off, knew someone who'd been laid off. I mean, panic was just, it was grounded, real fear. Mm-hmm. And I sat back and thought, what am I going to do so that my clients can continue to have a career and income, and so I can have a career and income? And business development was a clear answer to that. That led to me writing my first book, which is The Reluctant Rainmaker, a guide for lawyers who hate selling. And it is because I wrote that book back in 2009 that once my dad got into really the depths of his illness and went into home hospice, I stepped back from my business and from marketing. I still have a business today because of that book.
So, you know, interestingly enough, Julie and I met probably after she had started her own business, and we were in a mastermind together, and we were doing business development, and we were doing, you know, speaker trainings together and book writing. And there was all this stuff we were doing. And one of the things I remember specifically is you coming or leaving, either coming late or leaving early to something. And a mutual friend said, oh, she must have gotten a call about her dad. So tell us about like starting to prioritize, like where were the decisions around business and life and how things started to shift for you?
Sure. Yeah, they changed really quickly for me, actually, Ivy. My dad was my only remaining close family member. And by close, I mean closer than like a third cousin twice removed kind of family member. And so there was no one else who could care for him. And he and I have always been very close. And so it was also my choice as well as necessity. It quickly got to the point that I just didn't feel comfortable leaving him home alone. Because with dementia affects different people in different ways. One of the first ways it affected him is in what's called executive functioning. And that's things like your judgment, your ability to make decisions. And so I just didn't feel comfortable leaving him when I was on a business trip. So I took him with me. I would usually be able to take him, and I looked very carefully at the places where we stayed and made sure that it was in a safe location. He would have a place where he could walk around, but in an enclosed area. And so I would take him with me, and I would do the business during the day, and then I would come back and be with him in the evening. And of course, was always on cell. Thank goodness this is the age of cell phones and being able to see where someone else is based on where their cell phone is pinging. And most of the time it worked beautifully. The one time that my guess is you're remembering, Ivy, I got a call from my dad who said, I don't know where I am. And he had walked from a beachfront condo probably about a mile through the property up to the main road, which was a 4-lane divided highway with no sidewalks. So there were times when I had to say, you know what, sorry, gotta go. And that was the only explanation I'd be able to give. My dad was always my top priority. And it came through in things like that with meetings. It came through with bigger decisions also. One of my professional
share that
goals.
a little bit, because
sure.
You know, when we decide what our priorities are and we are hunkered down in our why, like what is important to us and why it's important to us, decision making starts getting very clear very quickly. And I know you were in this time of making decisions.
Absolutely. In every direction, it seems like all at once. one of my professional goals had always been to be chair of the American Bar Association section of Science and Technology Law. And I was invited onto that officer track in, I think it was 2010, and was ascending up. And it became clear to me, I think it was around 2012, I repeated my vice chair year with the officer's blessing because I didn't feel ready to move up to chair-elect because of what was going on with my dad. And I came back to them and I said, you know, I regret this, but I cannot do everything that is currently on my plate and do a good job. And if I'm going to drop a ball somewhere, it's not going to be with my dad. So I'm having to make some hard decisions. And I stepped off the officer track at that point. I regretted that because, like I said, it had always been a professional goal to become chair. But it was a really clear decision, the priority. There was no questioning the priority. My dad or that, and that's an easy decision. What I did not expect was that in 2016, I would be contacted again and invited to rejoin the officer rank and to start all over again, start at the bottom as secretary. But I'm currently chair-elect and will be chair next year. And I think the only reason that that opportunity came back around to me is because people could see from the decision that I made and from the way that I made it, that if I say I'm committed, I'm in. And if there's a problem, you'll know it. Mm-hmm. And so having the priorities be so clear, like you're talking about, it doesn't make the decisions easy, but it does make them very simple. And I think it lets us live in integrity in a way that people can see and respect.
So tell me now, share with us a little bit about the birth of Purple Sherpa, and how did this evolve for you? Was it, you know, clear decision of, okay, I'm going to transition my life. I'm going to run a business and what, give us the backstory and then what's going on today. Let's start with the backstory.
Okay.
Of this.
Sure. So the backstory is that I have wonderful friends. I have a great church family, but I didn't know anybody who had dealt with dementia. So I had friends who could listen, but they couldn't actually relate, and they certainly couldn't give me advice about what was going on with my dad. And I read all the books, but you know, there's a big difference between reading what some expert says and talking with somebody who says, okay, let me tell you how it really goes. And I tried to go to a support group, but as with many people who are living with dementia, afternoon and evenings were hard times for my dad, so I could only leave in the morning. And the morning support groups were typically people significantly older than me who were caring for a spouse. And so, you know, yes, there was some common ground there, but there's a huge difference between caring for a spouse and caring for a parent, and, you know, being retired and trying to balance caring for someone with making an income. So that wasn't very satisfying, and I ended up feeling really isolated. The other thing that happened is that although I'm a lawyer and my dad was a lawyer, and so we had terrific legal counsel all the way through, there were, I don't know that I'd say mistakes because it's not anything we did wrong, but a lack of ability to sort of see the 360 on a situation and to know what to do from a practical matter. And one example of that is that we got all of the affairs in order. I was my father's power of attorney, and he executed an advance directive for his medical care. And when you read through, it's very black and white. It's clear. I do this, I don't do that. There are so many gray medical decisions that I never anticipated. And there are conversations with my dad that I never got to have. And that's not a mistake in the sense of doing something wrong, but it's very difficult. So I was thinking about all of that. And in 2014, December of 2014, my dad went into home hospice for a cardiac issue, not for dementia. And because hospice was providing such good care and we didn't have to go to doctors anymore, and we were getting some additional support. We were in sort of this honeymoon period, as odd as that sounds. And so I had time to sort of look off in the distance and just think about stuff. And I started thinking, you know, it doesn't have to be this hard. It doesn't have to be this isolating. People need to know about the kinds of things that you don't see coming. Because if you do see them coming, and if somebody had said to me, talk with your dad about really what matters to him from a quality of life point of view, it could have been so much easier for me. So I just decided to start putting out a few videos.
It makes, you know, I just want to jump in here for a second, because it makes an amazing amount of sense based on also what we were just talking about. So when you have clarity, you can make decisions. When you're clear, you can make decisions. When you're second guessing, does this person, you know, how do you have these conversations? What do they, you know, I didn't think I needed, you know, whoever thought of this issue or that issue. And there's a lot of decision-making in the medical world that, you know, even as Julie and her dad being attorneys, they could not have foreseen, because we're not medical people. The attorneys are not medical people. So we guess on the amount of, yeah, this is basically how it's covered, but especially in an illness that takes time, that goes over a period of time, we have no idea as human beings how this, and probably the doctors don't, each person is a little individual, and how that plays out, and the decision-making that becomes challenging in that. And so you felt like this, there has to be an easier way. There has to be something out there. I've read the books, I've gone to the support groups, I've done this, that, and the other thing. How do we figure this out?
Exactly, and I think that as with so many other things, the only way we figure this out is to have a mentor of some sort. And so I decided I would just throw a few videos out, put them up on YouTube, see if it helped anybody. And so you asked, Ivy, you know, did I realize that this was going to change the course of my career and the way I spend my time? No, I had no concept that was not even a glimmer in the back of my mind. I just wanted to put out a few things to help people.
And then?
And then, yeah, the feedback was incredible. I put the videos up and put up a little website that I did myself. And Ivy, you and I both know how
we
how
should not be doing those things, right? No.
Right. I had no business. But on World Alzheimer's Day of 2015, I shared on Facebook, hey guys, I've just put these videos out. I thought they might help somebody. Would you share this if you know people who are dealing with this? And I put up a little Facebook page, you know, just to make it easy. And I was blown away by the feedback. I don't remember now the benchmarks, but, you know, here we are not quite 3 years later, not quite 4 years later.
Right.
And we're over 70,000 people on the Facebook page. The feedback was immediate, and people started saying, I needed this. So I opened a group so that we could talk. And I really, the way that I made the decisions about what the next right step was sort of twofold, or maybe even threefold. Number one, what was I hearing from people that they needed? So I sort of crowdsourced the thing that I was creating based on what people said they needed and wanted. I also ran that through the meter of what do I have the time and energy for? So to give you an example, I did a Facebook Live at one point that went on for about probably 90 minutes with people asking questions and us talking. Yeah. And at the end, I said, okay, so I think this is something that you guys like. How often would you like me to do this? And I got responses that said every day. And I said, yeah, no can do, guys.
Right. Beyond the bandwidth, we're running another business. We're doing, you know, we're trying to help, you know, but there's other complexities that go on in our lives.
Right. And my dad was still living at this point. So he was still my top priority. So I ran it through the filter of what am I willing to do? and what am I able to do? And tried to find the best compromise with those two things. And it seems to have worked. Our group is now approaching 5,000 people who are active dementia family care partners and caregivers.
So I have a curious question. Do you see the care partners and caregivers being primarily from dementia, or are you starting to get some overlap with other forms of caregiving with long illnesses?
I actually limit it exclusively to dementia. There are terrific resources for other diseases, but one of the interesting things with dementia is that there is such a stigma, and dementia is the most expensive illness in the US, at least, and I suspect worldwide. And it tends to affect people in a different way, because although there's similarities, there's so many wrinkles with dementia and so much lack of support. There's actually a quote that I personally feel is true. My mother died of cancer, and it says, with cancer, people rush in to help. With dementia, everybody disappears.
Ooh. And
so we limit to dementia because there are just some wrinkles there that make it unlike anything else.
So the evolution of Purple Sherpa, and now the evolution of your life as well, what is this starting to now look like?
So I'm still running Fleming Strategic. I still have clients there. The bulk of my time and energy is now on the Purple Sherpa. And my father died in July of 2017. So there's now a new addition to the Purple Sherpa, which is caring for people after the caregiving years. Because what happens there is the person you love dies. At the same time, you lose your job as caregiver, and you lose the purpose that you've had for however many years of trying to give this person the best life they possibly could have.
So
and
there's a lot of questions around identity then.
Exactly. Yes. Now what? Now what? How do you really build a new life? Because most of us find that although there are aspects of the old life to go back to, you really can't just pick up and continue forward. So that has changed. I am offering a grief support workshop this summer for the first time, a retreat, I should say. And the Purple Sherpa is where I spend my time because I see the need there. Lawyers are terrific people. I love working with them. I've written books, and I love the clients I have. The people who are dealing with dementia have so much greater need, and that's where I choose to serve more now.
So where do you approach the Purple Sherpa as you have approached building and running your own business? So do you have strategic plans? Do you have, because one of the core things you're helping attorneys with is business development and strategic planning. Do you take those same skill sets and apply them to the Purple Sherpa, and what would that look like?
Sure. So the answer is both yes and no. One of the key differences is that I knew nothing about running a nonprofit when I started this. Because again, I didn't really intend to start a nonprofit. I just wanted to put some videos out. So there's been a lot of on-the-job learning. But in terms of strategic planning, yes, I think that's always critical because plans change. But if you don't know where you're headed, it's very difficult to know whether you're succeeding. And so, for instance, to your question, do we address things other than dementia caregiving? That did come up early on. And because my strategic plan was so clear, no, this is about dementia, that was an easy decision. The flip side, I initially started out intending to speak to adult children caring for parents. And it quickly became clear to me that, no, there are a lot of spouses who need help caring for their spouse. There are people caring for siblings. We actually have parents caring for children, adult children, living with dementia. And so there I looked at the strategic plan and said, that's got to change. So it's important to have the strategic plan. It's important to know when to say, we need to change it. I also believe that nothing we do is wasted. So
yeah, you have to expand on this philosophy, because so many people stop and judge. It's like, oh, should I have done that? And I've wasted time. Or I love when you touch on this piece.
Yeah. I think it's so important, because I remember hearing years and years ago that the average person would have 7 careers. And I thought at the time that was just insane. Who on earth would do that? And I'm not sure what number I'm on here. But I look back, certainly my years as a lawyer are useful, not because I give legal advice. I did patent litigation. That is very different from estate planning and elder care law. But I'm able to say to people will ask a question. What should I do to make sure that the state can't take my parents' house or income? And I know that even though people are giving answers and they're giving citations based on where they live, that question is too important to trust to well-meaning strangers on the internet. And so I'm able to help people find a lawyer and find the right kind and know what to ask to make sure they're getting good advice. I studied science. I actually went through college twice, once as an English major to go to law school, and then once to get a biology degree so that I could take the patent bar and be a registered patent attorney. The scientific training is helpful because I know just enough to understand when people talk about medications and when we're talking about research towards a cure, which isn't actually in our wheelhouse, because the Alzheimer's Association, just to give one example of many, is doing great work there. They have millions of dollars that they're working with towards research. We don't have millions of dollars, and so we let that be their baby. But the science lets me know enough to comment and to give people some insight on why certain things are being discussed. Nothing is ever wasted. It comes around in ways that I never would have anticipated, but it always comes back around. And Ivy, you're such a great example of that with bringing dance into leadership, right?
It's interesting. And so I wanted to touch, it's very, very true. I could look at dance as my earlier piece of my life, or I could see the impact it has on leadership. Excuse me. One interesting thing here, Julie, is you don't sit idle. You've never been a woman who sits idle. And when you talk about 7 careers, the first thing that came to my mind is now is the concept of everything has its time or everything has its season. So you have in building the Purple Sherpa and keeping Fleming Strategic alive and active today, you as a fun project, because we all need a fun project in our lives, are doing something that's aligned with your mom. You want to share a little bit about this in women leadership? I couldn't miss out on this one.
I love it. So my mother she was born in Plainview, Texas, where there were a number of women lawyers as she was growing up. She left Plainview in the 50s to come to a women's college in Atlanta, where they wore heels, hats, hose, and gloves. And she was sort of the oddball because she went to medical school and was the only woman to graduate from her class in medical school. She had a great interest in women's issues. Because of her upbringing and what she saw growing up versus what she experienced as an adult. And she got interested in how women got the vote. Now, we're talking in 2019, so we're coming up to the centennial of the amendment that gave women the right to vote in the U.S. What few people know is that women were first given the right to vote in Wyoming Territory in 1869, 150 years ago. My mom was fascinated by how that came about and why. And so I grew up in dusty libraries in Wyoming while she was doing her research. She fell in love with the people and wrote a very long, detailed book, and she cut it down. Unfortunately, she died early. She died at 64, and her book was never published. So I am now working on that as well. And it's a fun project, and it's important to let people know how this started and why, especially given some of the women's issues that we're talking about today, and just knowing that even when a society is not necessarily set up for change, if people want to see change, there are ways to make it happen through a lot of work.
So, Julie, thank you so much for joining me here today. With information, insight, just in capturing a few takeaways is on the big picture of understanding your priorities in life. And that comes down to understanding what you want in your life and why things are important to you. And the decision, when you have clarity on this, as we were talking earlier, the decisions fall into place. Julie is, as you can hear and as you've listened today, a leader among women, and she comes from a line of women leaders. So I'm looking forward to one day reading your mom's book. I admire and respect enormously the work you're doing and you're building around the Purple Sherpa and filling a void for the caregivers that are not in an easy journey, and using your background as a woman leader yourself and a businesswoman in making this impact and having a ripple effect there.
Thank you so much, Ivy.
Thank you, Julie, for joining me. Julie, how can people be in touch with you?
The easiest way to find everything I do is at juliefleming.com. That's the gateway to Fleming Strategic and to the Purple Sherpa. Or they can email me at julie@juliefleming.com.
Fabulous. You want to connect to Julie if you know families and people who are have loved ones who are living a life with dementia, and we all need support. We all need support in a variety of things. Living life alone is a very lonely place. So knowing others with dementia and other families that are dealing with the illness, please connect them and become part of Julie's tribe. And the attorneys out there, Julie is brilliant in what she does because she has taken leadership to the next level. Julie, thank you for being here today, and I look forward to our next girl-to-girl catch-up time.
Me too. Thanks for having me, Ivy. I appreciate it.
I don't need your approval anymore, 'cause I've got mine.